Welcome to TheWrap's latest roundtable, AI in Hollywood, a creative turning point. My name is Roger Chang, managing editor in charge of business and pro coverage at TheWrap. And with me are some incredible guests for what I know will be an amazing conversation around AI. We have Hannah Elsakr, Vice President of New GenAI Business Ventures at Adobe, Van Robichaux, a screenwriter whose work includes Brooklyn Nine-Nine and the upcoming Wedding Crashers 2, Sarah Charlton, Chief Business Officer of Moonvalley, an AI video production company, Scott Mann, co-CEO of Flawless AI, which offers AI visual effects for post-production. And finally, there's Richard Kerris, General Manager for Media and Entertainment at Nvidia. And Richard, I'm going to throw it out to you first because just because AI is such a dense topic, I really want to get your perspective on sort of how we got here because AI has been in use for a while, and
Yeah,
only really recently has gotten a lot of attention for it. And given NVIDIA's sort of critical role in basically driving this revolution, I'd really want to get your perspective on this technology and sort of why we're here and why we're talking about AI today.
sure. Well, thank you. It's great to be here. And as you said, AI has been in use for a long time in the film and effects business. I think recently with generative AI, where you're seeing images and videos being created with prompts, created a bit of a stir. And I think some of it unwarranted in the sense of the concerns about how we got here, in the sense that initially this was done as a research project, and the research teams, they wanted to see if it could be done, first of all. So they trained on models that they could get a hold of, which was just the web, right? But then they showed the results of that. And so when they showed the results and everybody got excited about it and then said, well, how did you train on that? And, well, we just trained on the web, because they weren't doing it for a commercial use case. They were doing it for research. And I think a lot of the fear and concern said, well, wait a minute, you don't just train on the wild, wild west of the web without artist rights and everything else. Well, of course not. But from a research standpoint, that's why they were doing that. From a commercial standpoint, it's a much different story. So while people got very concerned at the onset, they were getting concerned by the research and not the commercial use applications. The commercial use applications are done by companies that do address the artist's rights and everything in the data that's trained. It's a trust in, trust out kind of model. And the exciting part about all of this is it enables more storytellers to tell their story with high quality video content, quite honestly. And I think that's one of the things that's a bit disruptive, we know, but so has other technologies in the past in the film. And, when's the last time you spoke to a matte painter or a model builder, things like that? These things evolve over time and become easier tools for people to tell the stories that they want to tell. We're incredibly excited about it because it does help democratize what has traditionally been a very difficult and costly environment to create the kind of visuals that people want to use to tell great stories. Now it's going to be out wider to more people, and that's going to be an exciting time for us all.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. This idea of democratizing AI democratizing the capabilities that are enabled by AI. I think one of the questions I think a lot of folks have is just how the industry can agree on the use of AI. And Hannah, I'm going to throw this to you, just in terms of um, this level, like keeping a consistent level for the use of AI. Like, how do you sort of see the industry kind of coming to agreement here?
Well, I liked that. I think Richard already said Wild Wild West at some point. So we're in the early stages, very early innings of a very new technology. And at least for me, the fastest adopted technology that I've seen. And we said that about the phone, we said that about, the internet, but this has literally been, I think Adobe, we've got 25 billion assets coming out of our models, 1 billion per month. That's a lot. That's fast. And so when I think about standards, right, there's a couple of elements of this. One thing that we felt very strongly about is about keeping human ingenuity at the center of the craft. And so, really, in a world where AI really just accelerates the ability, democratizes the ability to be creative, even for tech people like me, who are maybe not as creative, you could actually accelerate bad creative in a sense. And so, really, what differentiates people is vision, artistic vision, and artistic craft. And I think that's an important part of thinking of AI as just another paintbrush in the toolkit of artistry. The second point, when I said about keeping human ingenuity in the center, is IP rights are really important to creators because that's what's fueling. Why should I come up with a new style if it's not respected? And then again, we focused a lot on making sure every piece of data that underlies going into the model for training was something we had rights to train on. We asked permission for those things, and frankly, artists were compensated in the process of offering, the rights to train on that. And we also have a consortium called Content Authenticity, which is around watermarking, indelible forensic watermarking of the assets so that you can know what was created with what and if it was touched in Photoshop, Premiere Pro, if it was generated, those types of things. So those are some of the aspects, I think, Roger, that we're thinking through, not so much driving standard, but really uplifting quality of the craft through this process.
Yeah, and I think this falls in line with something that Scott and I talked about in terms of the ethical use of AI. I don't know, Scott, if you want to sort of dive a little bit more into that, what this concept is, because it sounds a lot like what Hannah's talking about, but if you can sort of elaborate a bit more.
Yeah, I think, well, it goes back to both. I think I think that, you know, tools for artists that help artists is really at the heart of what a lot of us are building. And I agree, it's like we're at the start of this commercial rollout of the use of these tools. Richard, I kind of wish it was true what you said entirely, because as much as like some of that is true, the research community kind of creating a bad thing, but that's not really true when it comes to the commercial uses and the way that tech companies have used this technology and commercialized it, and even commercialized it with the data that's been scraped and stolen. So I think, in terms of industries trusting one another, it does a lot of harm when that goes out, even if it's not directly in the
Oh
lane of
yeah.
our industry. So I think it's unfortunate that was an over. I think there's truth in what you said, but it's an oversimplification and a bit of a, I don't think it helps with establishing trust between industries if it's tried to kind of say it that
Yeah.
way.
No, I agree with that. Just to be clear, I was talking about the initial onset when we were seeing the research. The bad use cases, absolutely agree. There's got
But
to be the
but
credible.
there's been a lot of commercialization of that research,
And
and you look at the string of lawsuits that are in the courts right now, and they all represent challenges against commercial use case of that data. So I think that we've started off from a bad place where I think largely technology companies have lent into this, not understanding the framework of Hollywood and the fact that the entertainment business is a rights business. And fundamentally, it's all about rights. So I think I think um, taking that into account, I think that's been at the core of Flawless of our company. It seems to be like Moonvalley are also kind of following that framework, which is great to see. And I think they're great use, ways of doing this, where we're actually building tools for artists in a truly ethical way. But I think there's a big gap in the trust of what tech companies would like this to be versus the trust of which Hollywood can believe that with a lot of the companies involved.
agreed.
Scott, no, that's a great point about trust, and I wanted to throw it over to Van just to get his perspective, and because I know he's worked on the WGA's AI working group, and would love to get your perspective on whether there is trust with screenwriters, with creatives about using AI.
Hi, absolutely. Yeah, I want to echo what Scott said that I think there are large trust issues. And I think that to push back on Richard a little more, claims like the one he seemed to make that training issues are kind of a thing for the academic lab and are not an active issue with commercial AI systems. I think that's just blatantly incorrect. We do happen to have a panel here of people who are largely from highly ethical AI companies that are the exception and not the rule. The largest players in the space, like OpenAI, do not share the point of view that the common crawl public data on the internet and that publicly available data is off limits for training. Their models were being trained on that up until the point that they stopped sharing and refused to say what their models are trained on. However, in their responses to the lawsuits, they do say that their position is that that training should be allowed. And so I can only assume they're continuing to train on that kind of data. Nvidia itself has its own internally trained LLM that I believe does state it is trained on publicly available data and proprietary data. And so that is a commercialized model, and that is trained on publicly available data, which means of data that you can kind of get your hands on because it's out in the public. An example for screenwriters that's particularly interesting is that for years there's been sort of an epidemic of people just upload screenplays to the internet without having any rights to them. Screenwriters actually, as part of their WGA separated rights, control the publishing rights for original screenplays. And as a result, it's kind of been an issue that studios don't really police that uploading because they don't actually control those publishing rights themselves. And so the Common Crawl contains thousands of WGA screenplays. And so by default, most LLMs end up being trained on that information. There's been research showing that. And there was, I think it was a New York Times article about that. But I would venture to say that almost every major commercial text LLM is trained on Writers Guild material as a result of it being published on the internet. And it's specifically material that was published without permission, which I think is specifically true about our instance, but I think also kind of shows how the logic behind if something is on the internet, it's out there, and so it's fair game to train on, isn't necessarily so straightforward, because there's a lot of stuff out there on the internet that wasn't put out there by the person who actually controls the material.
Yeah.
Richard, do you want to respond or?
Well, yeah, first of all, I agree that the artist's rights need to be respected clearly. And when our training has done, it's not for making Hollywood movies, just to be clear. It's for training robots or autonomous driving, things where as much data as possible gives you a safer output of the content being used. It's not to go out and make a feature film. I completely agree that it is important to have the respect for what is being brought into the system to be trained, so that what's being used on it can be ethically inferred out for the use cases. So I'm in agreement to that. I was simply referring to the initial onset of what we saw from research. You're right. There's been a lot of other misuse cases, as there's been with lots of technologies throughout history. But what we want to have is the ethically trained model, like we're talking about here, so that it can be used as a viable tool in filmmaking, the same way other, photo manipulations are used, or de-aging is used, or digital twins are used, et cetera. That's the kind of concept stuff that we're talking about here. So I'm in agreement.
I think just to kind of give it an edge as well, it's complex, right? Because there's different
It
use
is.
cases.
Yeah, yeah.
So like what Richard, in terms of like perceptive data and things that aren't necessarily generating something, it falls into different categories, right? Than generation, so to speak. So I think Hollywood actually, I think has gotten to a point now where it seems to be separating out these technologies into two kind of buckets. Like one is assistive AI, where you're taking footage and modifying it, and one's generative AI, where you're generating something whole and new. And I think this generative bucket is where it's most dangerous ultimately, because it's pulling from sources. To Van's point, it's like pulling from sources that have not given their permission for that use. And I think the value chain it's just stealing at the end of the day. It's stealing from the value of what goes into it as source data, and then reselling it as something else. And I think that's the problem that everyone's kind of facing. And I think it's really understanding that. And the rights framework is complex as well, because it doesn't just go to kind of base level video audio. It goes into all the artists that contributed into the work in a way which is kind of hard to untangle, especially from the outside of the industry. So, you look at all of that and you say, okay, really the people who are putting value or creating value in these models should be in control of the outcome, and they should kind of be able to take part as a trickle up effect of the benefits, in a sense. That should be what should happen. And I think that's what
Scott,
that's what
what I really appreciate about what you said is it is use case specific. And so, we consider ourselves at Adobe like part of that OG creative process, whether it's film or furniture design or, UX design. And so when it's a use case of make my life better in post-production, and we have commercially safe tooling underneath and modeling underneath, for instance, one thing in Premiere, which people are loving is, hey, I don't, my scene's not lining up with the beats of the music. And gosh, wouldn't I love to extend that by half a second to do that? We have models now that are commercially safe, licensed models that underpin and let someone do that. Otherwise, what would you do? You'd have to go look for different B-roll. You'd have to go reshoot, those types of things. So I feel like some of those familiar use cases are ones that folks in the industry are really rallying behind because it's saving so much time and energy, or reframing for 10 different paid social use cases, for marketing a movie. So I love that you said use cases, because I think that's what it gets down to, like the value of it as well.
To that point, I just a note. I think that what Scott hit upon is, the difference between assistive and generative. There's a lot of nuance to this, and I think there's a lot. I think that's why there's a lot of confusion around AI. There's sort of the threat side, there's the opportunity side. Just to sort of wrap this section about just kind of creating a baseline for the industry, and I'll throw this last one to Sarah. Just how do you educate folks in this industry and get them smart enough to even understand to the point where we can come to some sort of agreement about how we should be using AI responsibly?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think the focus for us is building with integrity in Hollywood, right? And so that's making sure that AI is not a disruption that's happening to Hollywood, but it's a transformation that's happening together with the artists and the filmmakers at the center, right? And so for us, that starts with fully licensing the content, but that's just the foundation for building with integrity, right? And next piece is building with the filmmakers, building with the artists, and making sure that this is something that people can use to enhance their creative process, rather than to replace like anything that's happening. Right. So I think it's that foundation of building it together that really allows us to make something that meets the needs of all the people who are participating in the industry already, who are the creative visionaries putting out the really incredible work that powers the world we live in today.
Okay. Well, that's a great answer, and I do want to kind of dive into that the idea of sort of assisting filmmakers, and we'll talk a little bit about the opportunities there. Hannah, I'll just throw it to you because I know you've talked about in the past sort of how AI can change the creative workflow, and I don't know if you could dive a little bit more into that, give some specific examples on what that actually looks like, what those benefits might actually be.
Yeah, sure. I mean, and I'm not a great student of history, but I do think history helps us here a little bit, um, in the sense that whenever new technologies are adopted, at the intersection of creativity and technology, and I'll give like the invention of the camera in the 1800s as one. It was first met with rejection. It was like, this is killing painting. Painting is dead. And what we know is that's not true, right? Obviously, vectored off lots of different new art forms and mediums and artists. Honestly, the same thing happened to us in Photoshop in the 90s, where when we launched Photoshop, there was like rejection of the idea of digital art being an art form. And we brought in David Hockney, obviously now well renowned, but to kind of jam with us and over time really legitimize the idea of digital art as an art form. And by the way, if you didn't learn that, I think you missed the internet revolution when that came out as well. So I like to fast forward that to what we're thinking about now, specifically, and we're working in all the mediums, of course, vector, and illustration, image, audio, great. But in film specifically, one parallel I go to was in the 20s, the idea of Hollywood and the Hollywood lot was novel. It was like, is a physical lot with all these actors and script writers and equipment and costumes, and everyone was in this physical space, and that was like the ecosystem that was super efficient for Hollywood in the 20s. Now, of course, in the impending years, things have moved offshore, and lots of things have been introduced. But I think we as a group, back to ethical or thinking responsibly, have a moment to reinvent the new AI Hollywood lot. I actually think the whole workflow, the idea of previs as its own contained thing and post production as its own contained thing in a linear workflow, that's about to revolutionize and change. If you had a model that you could generate off of responsibly, in a sense, you could ideate tons of different things in the process where the idea of fixing it in post, right, like that famous phrase, diminishes. You don't have to fix things in post in the sense that you can get shots that you couldn't get, or append shots, or add things there. So I think we're in the very early. I'd love to actually work with Dan, you, and Scott. Like, let's reimagine what that AI lot of the future looks like and the workflow behind it, because I think it's going to blow our minds in a bit. But we're not there yet. We're making the familiar better first.
All right, makes sense. Well, she threw it to you, Van, so I'll throw it to you as well. But in terms of those conversations about the opportunities in AI, like when you're talking to other screenwriters, other creatives, how it how does what are those opportunities that those folks are talking about?
Yeah. So I think that there are, um, there are tremendous opportunities and use cases for AI in various parts of Hollywood film production. I just want to, before I go on, say I just want to shout out to Adobe for being one of the first major players in AI to come out with a creator-centric and ethical training point of view. That happened very early on, and I think their planting of a flag there really helped. You know, I'm sure Flawless and Moonvalley to be able to convince their own investors that there is a there there, and I really appreciate that. One of the issues that I think we're seeing right now with the adoption of AI technology is that there are use cases already that are helpful and ethical, and they are being rejected by a large number of people in the creative community because of the existence of some of the less ethical, we'll say, things out there. I know that Moonvalley has been working on a film with Natasha Lyonne. And when that was announced, there was a tremendous amount of pushback online. A lot of it, I think, very misdirected. I actually came out and defended the film and defended its use of AI because, from everything that I understand, Moonvalley seems to be going about this in a very ethical manner. I'm not sure if everything they've done has been exactly perfect. I don't have the information to know that, but it is in the direction of where I would like to see these things head. And in my mind, I want to applaud those things rather than, say, let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I know there were some people who, when I pushed back and said they're trying to do this in an ethical manner, they said, well, what's the exact data in the training set? They haven't released exactly what it is. You're just taking their word on it. And what I said was, I know they're working with Jaron Lanier, and if you don't know, he's a very well-respected person in the area of computer ethics and is a probably much more ethically driven person than everyone on this video call. And I said, if he is trusting Moonvalley, then I will actually take their word for it. But I think that some of the things you're already seeing that take existing work that you've created and help you to adjust it to better fit your vision are some of the most immediately useful tools. Lip retiming is one of them, obviously. Some blending of shots, that sort of thing. Shot extension. There's a lot of great new tools around relighting, which are also very useful. One concern I have going forward with these tools is, I think a thing that actually has hurt the quality of films ultimately is how the transition to digital capture made it so much cheaper and easier to shoot more content and to reshoot content. I think that has actually led to a bad habit of not making decisions uh, in advance or on set and leaving them till the post production process or till the inevitable reshoots. And I think there is, this talk of a new workflow with a little bit less post and pre-production and more production happening all at once. You see that also with virtual production and things like that that are allowing people to make the decisions there on set in a way that I think does empower the filmmaker and lets you have some flexibility with, maybe we relight this or we change this, but I think you really, if you can empower the filmmakers to make those creative decisions on the day in the moment rather than trying to shoot something as flat as possible on a green screen so that you can figure out where the scene actually takes place down the line, which happens on quite a few superhero films. I won't name a specific studio, but I think that can lead to better art, essentially.
No, that's
Yeah,
great.
to
You threw it to Moonvalley, Sarah. Just if you could talk a little bit about also just what Moonvalley does, because I don't know if everyone in the audience necessarily knows, and just talk about some of those opportunities created from your technology.
Yeah, for sure. So Moonvalley is an AI research company that's building fully licensed AI video for use by Hollywood studios, by brands with taste and integrity that really want to be part of our movement of commercial safety. We do work closely with Adobe as well. So we're trying to be part of that bigger ecosystem of players who are trying to build an end-to-end commercially safe option for people. To exactly Van's point, to build options for people to empower their storytelling without needing to make compromises on the underlying data sets or the creative choices that are being made. And I think Van hits it like right on the head there with what we're trying to enable is the storytelling like Natasha Lyonne's Uncanny Valley, which is let's take stories that otherwise couldn't be told, right? It's really difficult to get $150 million budget to tell a story. And if we can make that less expensive, it's not just about the cost cutting component, it's about the democratization of allowing powerful storytellers like Natasha to have a venue to tell a story that otherwise wouldn't have an audience, wouldn't be able to get distribution, and wouldn't be commercially viable. So our big hope working together with artists is really that we can lower some of the costs of production so that more fantastic materials can be made, so more people can have a chance to get their work out into the world.
That's a great point about sort of the getting this cost down, maybe allowing studios to be more adventurous or more experimental with the projects, that they do choose. I think, Scott, we
Yeah.
we talked a little bit about this, right?
Yeah.
What kind of projects this might be able to enable in the future.
Yeah, it echoes exactly that, right? Like, I think the problem we have in our industry at large is it's just very expensive, right? It's very expensive because it takes a very long time, and the traditional ways of film and television making, they're very kind of heavy and slow, and they're like 100 years old. The technology's really, like, I know we've gone through certain kind of different upgrades of it, but it's a very similar process. I think key to having a growing and thriving industry, which right now it isn't, right? Right now we don't have that, and you've got only movies with massive budgets getting made, and very little risks in originality. And I think that bringing the cost and the time it takes to make productions opens up for more originality, allows you to do basically more with less, which has been the focus of Flawless's tools as well. It's been being able to shoot some and make a lot more with it, whether that's changing dialogue or translating different languages or modifying performances, this kind of thing, to really be able to do a lot more with the footage that you shoot. And those kind of assistive uses mean that for me as a director, rather than like right now with our tools, for example, which have been used on a number of films now, rather than shooting for 10 weeks to shoot a production, you can do the same thing about 8 weeks. And as director, it gives you kind of, okay, well, I've got 2 more weeks to shoot the other things that normally I'd be compromising back on there. So it's kind of empowering that. And I think what we'll see with the kind of, as we step through these different technologies that really are useful and commercially useful, the speed at which you're able to do that more with less, that's just going to increase and increase and give you more creative options.
I think this is a really important point. Like 85% of Sundance films are probably touched in an Adobe tool in some way. And when I talk to those types of filmmakers, Scott, to your point, they're like, if you could shave 3 weeks off of my schedule, first of all, I could probably do another short that I didn't get to do. It was in my book, I never got to. And it lowers the bar, like nobody's getting financed. And so I need to do a lot more on my own. Even helping with maybe visualization for people to greenlight things is really really important. And the other industry trend, I know everyone wants to talk about blockbusters. The attention span of the average consumer is quite low. In fact, to the point where like micro dramas are, 1 minute micro dramas are all the rage. And I know all of you are trying to extend franchises with YouTube shorts, right? 3 to 7 minutes of extra storylines. That's all really expensive to do if you have to do 3 shorts a week, for a franchise. And so I do think back to video is eating the world, but it's maybe eating the world in different formats. When you have options like Moonvalley's Mary model or Adobe's video model, or maybe use them both together, we don't mind, you have more optionality to get more content and more fan engagement out there. And that's kind of the end of the game. We can't wait 6 months just for the next thing to come out. We need more storylines, backstories, new characters, and frankly, maybe put it into the hand. We're doing something with custom models that respects your IP and lets you put it out there. Maybe you want the fans to generate the next character in your style. That's like a new,
Well, I think
monetization model.
I love these points. I think the driver is the storytelling for sure. And I think that as I'm hearing these different use cases, it really is about the tools. When you're talking about the different distribution methods, then it gives the director the ability to say, I'm making a story here, but I also want to tell it in three different places on a mobile device and the screen. AI can also help in that context as well. But again, it comes back to the storyteller. That is the key central point here. And I think that's the driver that we're all talking about.
I think a big concern that people have that I think this kind of touches on is, will AI and the cost reductions that it can bring um, cause a decrease in employment for the creative professionals who work in film? And I think that while there is a possibility of that, and while I think that that fear is warranted, especially because some of the large players in AI, that's their pitch to enterprise, is that they will be able to reduce workforces. I think that if you look at how the output of Hollywood has reduced in the last 2 years, what you can see is that what will bring more jobs is more production. And I do think that bringing down some of these costs, while it might seem like, oh, then we're employing fewer people, that might be true on a project by project basis. But if it increases the number of projects being made, I think that that actually can lead to an
I,
increase in employment.
I couldn't agree more, Van. That's totally. I think that's the zoom out kind of actual. I think that's I think that's the truth, right? If you can help grow and help an industry thrive, it helps just across the board. So if you can make more and better films, for example, you're able to put more in cinemas. You're able to reduce cinema tickets, for example. Like, it has this knock-on effect across the entire distribution ecosystem, and the audience's kind of interaction points at that, where you're able to pass that on and do more. So I totally think that you know AI tooling that does that, really, it's kind of the silver bullet for Hollywood, especially, right? That can really inject it with this new technology tooling that is going to make a huge positive difference, and ultimately it's going to create more jobs if the industry is thriving. So that's what I think is the bigger picture to look
So,
for.
so I agree with that, but I also just want to challenge a little. The agreement is, when the Industrial Revolution came out and the steam engine, people also were like, "Oh my gosh, I drive a horse and buggy, I'm out of a job." We know, 2.5 jobs to like tens of millions of jobs. Of course, economic expansion. However, there is dislocation. I think to Van's point, there is going to be micro dislocation, and so there is a challenge to all of us to upskill, right? And to educate and not be kind of left behind. I would love to hear, like, I know we have our own kind of approaches around that, but like, how do we get AI a better PR agent for the industry and like get people on board? Like, what should we be doing to upskill
Yeah.
people?
No,
Well,
that's a great
it
point.
comes down to the content that's going to be created, right? I mean, a good content is going to survive. Look at what happened in the music industry when things went from having to be done in a studio to be done on a laptop. Oh, you'll never get the quality of the studio on a laptop. That changed because the quality of the content that was being done. I think the more that we can really see new and innovative content being created with these tools, the better it is for the industry. We're not just remaking the same old film over and over. And that's, I think, one of the biggest problems that people face is like, oh, another redo, right? We want to see new stuff. And this
Yeah,
gives the ability for new storytellers.
I think a big issue from a PR standpoint is that a lot of the um, content that you see pushed online to show the capabilities of AI and to show how impressive AI is very low quality content. Not necessarily from, like, sure, it's in 4K and it's
Yeah, but it's not
picture
doing
stuff,
anything.
But the
but
What's it
narrative's
doing?
terrible.
Exactly. It's
if I
like,
see one more, like, it's like a cell phone video, but it's from a different time period of a guy
yeah,
talking to the camera. Like, what? Like, that's
yeah.
not a meaningful thing.
Yeah, it reminds me of when desktop publishing happened and everybody used 20 fonts on a slide.
Yes,
You were like, oh, that's horrible.
and
Just because
so
you can do it doesn't mean you should do it, right?
Yes,
yeah,
Yeah,
Jeff Goldblum,
more
right there. He was right.
subtle
Yeah.
and effective uses of the technology, I think, will go a long way. But when CGI animated films came in, there was a huge concern in the animation industry that the number of jobs would be reduced as a result, and the opposite happened. The number of jobs increased drastically, and the as part of the negotiation that the Animation Guild made with the studios, they were provided job retraining for certain people to, if you were doing ink and paint, you could become a rigger and things like that. And there were these new opportunities for them to do that. And I think, at least internally to Hollywood, as jobs shift in that way, I think we are going to need to figure out a way to provide retraining to adjacent roles, because a lot of the skills are the same and similar, but they aren't necessarily one to one doing exactly what you're doing. But looking at a piece of software that can do relighting, I with like a day of training, almost any gaffer could be able to do that and use that software, and they would probably be much better at it than I am. And I think that that's like the sort of training that I think is necessary and can be helpful.
I think building on Van's point, this is about how do we do that transformation together with the artists that are already working, right? And so at Moonvalley, we focus a lot on how are we going to deploy teams to studios to work with the people who are already doing the creative work right now, right? To say, okay, here's what you're doing now. Here's how we can do that with our tool, and you'll still be the architect, because we also know, to the point of the discussion about kind of the AI schlock that's out on the internet, right? We know where the people with the creative vision are, right? They're already employed, they're already working in the industry, they found places for themselves. And so, how do we get them the tools and work with them? We really believe it's about putting our teams together with them to help them create what they know best.
Well, I want to continue on this point with jobs because I think it's an important one. And Van, we talked a little bit about sort of the pipeline of talent, right? The fact that AI would presumably eliminate a lot of those sort of entry level positions that really for a lot of industries, not just in entertainment, but in journalism and accounting, where sort of those entry level positions are those folks basically mature into the leaders of tomorrow. And I'm curious. I want to get all your thoughts on this, actually, on just on how we would replace that pipeline if presumably a lot of these entry level positions would be eliminated because of AI.
Yeah, one of the places that I know AI is getting used right now, for better or worse, in development, is for script reading. And traditionally, that was a job that was done by interns, by assistants, and by paid script readers, who that was their actual job, to write script coverage. And aside from whether or not an AI can actually do as good of a job right now, I think let's pretend it could. I'm not sure that's true, but let's pretend it could. It does create a pipeline problem that every single major Hollywood producer you've ever heard of started with a low level industry job that is going away as people both cut budgets in general and start relying on these tools to do the work that is something low level, but that brings you into the business. When I got my first agent, it came from an assistant at a company who had read a script of mine and passed it on to an agent. And that guy went on to be a producer and was nominated for an Oscar this last year for The Brutalist. He was one of the producers of that. And I worry, like, would his job even exist if they didn't need assistants reading all of the screenplays that come in over the transom? And if his job doesn't exist, does he become a producer? Does The Brutalist not get made? Worst of
Does
all, do I not get a career?
Mm. That would be terrible. It's but I think, doesn't it? Does it? Like, that's all true, but does it not just change what an entry level job looks like? Because I think, like, me as I was a filmmaker, coming in and kind of working through things, like, it's hard to get to work up to directing feature films, right? Very kind of closed gate, very difficult to get through. Same with being a feature writer, right? We know how difficult that is to get there. But with these new tools, you're going to end up in a place where you're able to make films earlier and express yourself. And obviously, it's a bit early to kind of understand what we'll look for in that creative landscape. But as a writer, you might end up making films before you become a writer, right? And that might be how you learn. Just like as a writer, you typically don't really understand the impact of your writing until you've had a feature or TV made to the end, and then you understand how the sausage is made and what the difference that is, right? So you end up with a different perspective. But with these new tools, you're going to kind of get a different, you're going to have these new workflows, these new creatives. And I guess it's scary because it's a change and it's not what we know.
But
But
Scott, I mean, I think what you and Van are saying is you came up through the ranks doing certain, I'm sorry, scut work, right? Grunt work that you felt defined you and got you to the place. I think, Scott, what you're saying, which I agree with, is maybe there's different things that prove out your creative vision, your ability to tell narrative. I'm a trained computer scientist, and the same thing is happening, the dislocation in coding. Bad vibe coders are bad vibe coders because they have no idea about structure of programs. That skill as part of being a great engineer is never going to go away. You can hack it for a little bit, but I think the machine will spit you out because your code will be bloated, it won't run well. I feel like the same thing will happen. Maybe you enter a little higher because there's agentic work helping you, but it's going to let the real gems maybe separate earlier in the process or be able to do projects. Or that's kind of my hope of what will happen.
I feel like the big kind of takeaway, from my perspective at least, on these things is that the non-creative jobs are the ones that are shifting, right? The creative jobs are kind of getting more value and actually get a benefit from this. It's the non-creative stuff. So if they're the entry level jobs, then they probably will be the ones that shift around and change.
Actually, one director said to me that those were offshore anyway, and so maybe we allow bringing some other things back onshore and doing more work actually in the same time zone. That's a thought.
Well, thank you all. We have time for just one more question that I want to throw out to all of you, sort of lightning round question. But I think, as mentioned, right now it's still the wild, wild west of AI. But what do you all think will be what we're talking about a year from now? What role will AI play a year from now? And will it still be the wild, wild west? Go ahead, Scott.
Sorry, I don't. I know my immediate is. I think it'll be very different a year from now. I think we've seen a huge change in the last 6 months in terms of people's understandings. I think a year from now, like I can speak for what Flawless is building and that path and what that realistically looks like. I think we right now have our tools being used, and let's say they're reducing the amount of time you can shoot by 20%. I think a year from now, that's probably 50% by the amount of tooling that's coming down the pipe that's actually at studio level. And I think just like with Sarah as well, it's like similar stories are going on there. And I think the more that we adapt it, the more that we'll start seeing the positive benefit. And I think we're obviously coming up to another guild negotiation as well. So I think that's the perfect time to also sort out a lot of the things that we've been talking about here, because there is a kind of an ownership here by both studios and all the guild members and the artists themselves and the tech companies that needs to come around and come together to really see this through. So I'm hopeful that coming into next year, we've all got a better understanding of generative versus assistive, how it can benefit, things like this, and we all come into it in a slightly more kind of educated way to really understand how it can benefit our industry and use it properly. So I'm quite hopeful that we'll see huge shifts in the next year or so, and I think it will be a very different landscape 12 months from now.
Okay, Richard.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the more we talk and see great content being created and the less we have to identify the AI, the more it just becomes a regular tool in the process. And more people making better films and content for people to enjoy, that's the end result, right? That's what we want.
Sarah.
Yeah, I think in the next year, we're going to see major studios adopting generative AI, especially now that we have commercially safe options. But I think to Richard's point, we're going to see it as a tool that people start finding a place for. And there's a huge role for the guilds to say, what's the right place for it? What does commercially safe usage look like? And that's really the groups that we look to set the ethical line in the industry. And so I'm really looking forward to that adoption and that growing consensus from people in the industry about how these tools can and should be used.
Okay, Van.
So I think I will play the skeptic here. While I do think there will be an increase in understanding of what these tools are and an increase in the use of these tools, I think, at least as far as perception goes, I think we will be exactly where we were a year ago or a year from now, because Hollywood does move at a glacial pace. It takes over a year to get a film made. If you have a script that is ready to go and everyone attached, you still can't make it happen for at least a year. And so, as huge as these shifts can and potentially will be, I think they are going to take some time. So yes, I think you will see, produced and released television and films that have utilized these tools to an increase. But I think that sometimes when these tools are used best, it's imperceptible. So I think you will see some behind the scenes change. But as far as like a sense that Hollywood has been entirely reimagined by AI a year later, I don't see that happening.
All right, I'll give the last word to Hannah.
Two things. One is I would like us as an industry to rally more to give voice to responsible AI. And I think we're not educating. Thank you, Roger, and TheWrap, like having a conversation and shouting loud about the differences, the nutrition label of models that Scott and Van talked about. Not all models are created equal is like a really, really important point that we have got to get through in the next year. Because I would like to see AI conversations not be about AI, but about the beautiful output and creative outcomes that we're making. If we can stop talking about AI in 2 years and it's just like, oh, nobody talks about CGI anymore or 3D animation, we have arrived. That's not next year. I agree with Van, but our job as leaders in this industry is really to give voice, I think, to responsibility and IP rights for creators. So again, anytime anybody wants to call, let's get together and do it and not wait for someone else. But thank you so much for letting us have this honest conversation.
No, and thank you all for joining in. This is clearly the start of a conversation for a long story to come when it comes to AI and where things are headed. So thank you all. That's a wrap.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.